Okay, we're live, everybody, to the Duran live number 37. Hello to everyone out there. Thank you for joining us for another live. And as summer is approaching, guys, things are heating up. Got a lot of stuff to talk about today, and let's just jump right into it. So thank you for everybody who's joining us. If you can hear me all right, let me know in the chat. And let's meet our distinguished Duranners, our panel. We have in Moscow, the man, the legend, the myth, Mr. Peter Lavelle, host of RT's Crosstalk. Peter, how are you doing today?
Excellent. Nice summer day, short sleeves. Last day of vacation before I go back to work tomorrow.
All right. And what do you have going on tomorrow? You have a couple of shows to record?
Yeah, we're going to do about the persecution of Christians around the world and why the West doesn't care. And my traditional, long-standing, we do a program on the meaning of Victory Day in Europe in 1945 over fascism. And I have a very distinguished panel. I'm very excited about it. We'll probably go into extended time because this is such great guests. So I'm a trained historian, so I'll be in the thick of it, right where I like to be.
Big day for Russia, May 9th.
Huge day here.
Huge day, yeah, absolutely. And we have in London, the Oracle of London. You know him as the Oracle, but we know him as Alexander Mercouris. Alexander, how are you doing today?
I'm very well, Peter. Alex, the weather here is good. It's a bit cold, but it's bright.
All right, great. All right, everybody, thank you for joining us. If you are not subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button. Guys, smash that like button. Share the channel with everybody you know. Let's get into the news of the week. And let's see here. The first person on the chat, guys, was Matt Weller. And the first thing he wrote on the live stream was Venezuela or Iran. We've got warships kind of going everywhere, it seems. They're in the Persian Gulf. They're at South China Sea. Peter, storm clouds are brewing.
Yeah, I think
storm clouds are brewing. Storm clouds, war clouds are forming.
Well, we're in the bluff stage right now. It's very interesting. Maybe this is the added value, quote unquote, of Donald Trump. Maybe this is his sense of art of the deal. I don't think. Look, the military, the Pentagon, they like big fat budgets. They're not keen to going to war, and nothing has really changed when you think of Iran. It would be an absolute disaster, but it's a show of force, and it's something that Trump seems to be very, very fond of. The military doesn't have a problem with a show of force, but it's the next step. Also with Iran and sending a carrier fleet is that there's people are wavering regarding the waivers. And this is something that the administration wants to show everyone that they're serious about it. With Venezuela, well, with the embarrassment of the third attempt to complete the coup, they have to do something. So actually, saber rattling shows desperation in the Trump administration vis-a-vis Venezuela. I'd like to point out that the State Department released very, very briefly what it thought its achievements were so far in Venezuela. I'll send you the link and you can put it up. It's quite disgusting. It's the level of bullying is just unbelievable for the U.S. State Department, where they're supposed to do diplomacy. So obviously, Iran and Venezuela are in play. The world energy markets are in play. But I'm not going to panic yet. I think it shows more bluster on the part of the Trump administration than real action. And particularly when it comes to Venezuela, they need to do something because they're so red-faced over this, the third attempt. I saw this picture of on Facebook. It was Guaido on a phone, and the caption was, "Mom, can you come and pick me up?" That's the situation they're in.
All right, let's see where people are joining us from, and we'll get to Alexander. Alexander, we got people from Singapore, from Mariupol, Ukraine, awesome, from England. Where else are you guys joining us from? From Scotland, Wisconsin. Let's see, where else? Southern California. All right, Colorado, Bangkok. All right, great. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Share the channel with everybody you know from California, from Jersey, Malaysia. Greetings from Serbia, from Quebec, New Hampshire. Alexander, Rachel Maddow is now best buddies with John Bolton. Is this all a bluff, or do you think that we're going to have some conflict somewhere?
Oh, I know. I think Rachel Maddow, in terms of her, I think she's entirely sincere. Now, will there be a conflict? I would add to that list of where the US is now operating its warships, of course, the South China Sea, because we're getting reports this morning that the US fleet is actually also patrolling the South China Sea, and the Chinese government, which is, of course, the government of a superpower with an economy which by some measures is bigger than that of the US now, is loudly protesting about these deployments. But I tend to agree with Peter. I think that a lot of this is bluff at the moment, despite Rachel Maddow's hopes and despite John Bolton's undoubted desires. John Bolton never saw a war which he didn't want to start, and never saw a war which he ever wanted to end. But having said that, I think that the Pentagon and Donald Trump do not at this moment want a conflict either with Iran or with Venezuela, and certainly not with China. With China, it would be an apocalyptic disaster. With Iran, it would be almost as bad. With Venezuela, it would probably not be on quite that scale, but it would be a very long, drawn out and extremely politically difficult affair. I don't think Donald Trump wants to see it. I don't think the Pentagon wants it. And I don't think for the moment it's going to happen. But you're right to bring up Rachel Maddow. You're right to bring up John Bolton, because what it shows to me is that these two people supposedly on either ends of the ideological and political divide in the United States are actually coming together to try and force this hyper-aggressive, hyper-militaristic foreign policy on the Trump administration, on Donald Trump, and on the American people. Now, they also have the media behind them. Rachel Maddow is, of course, a part of the media. So the chorus demanding action is going to grow. And we just have to hope that the line will hold. I think it will hold for the moment, but the pressure to start a new war somewhere, one gets the sense almost on the part of these people, anywhere. But at the moment, the targets are clearly Venezuela and Iran, and perhaps, hopefully not yet China. The pressure is mounting, and I suspect it will continue to mount.
What I think is, I'm really glad that you brought up the media angle here, because the Trump White House has figured out that it can get positive reviews from the mainstream. It's almost like putting Trump hatred on the pause button, because he knows that the media loves this stuff. It's great for ratings. It's great for the graphics, those beautiful missiles. And for him, it's a respite from all of the negative news being hurled at him 24/7. And so we have to build that into it as well. Trump likes to be called presidential. He likes to be seen as a strong man. And in the liberal media, as exemplified by Rachel Maddow, like it. So you can't dismiss that angle here. I mean, you obviously can't keep it up indefinitely, but it's part of Trump's re-election campaign strategy. We can't dismiss that. All right.
All right, Peter, we have a question from Happy Cat before the live stream started. And the question is in regards to Iran and Venezuela. Where is Russia and China in all of this? Now that warships have been deployed to the Persian Gulf, you have Maddow egging on Bolton to go to war in Venezuela as well, to do something in Venezuela. I won't say war, but to do something. We do know that Russia and China are involved, but where exactly and to what extent are they involved with Iran and with Venezuela?
Well, I think it's quite clear that because of the belligerent stance this White House and past White Houses have had with Iran, and particularly Iran did agree to the international agreement on the nuclear deal that has really brought Russia and Iran closer together. And I would say loosely that the Kremlin has Tehran's back. Okay, I mean, sharing of intelligence, necessary defensive weapons if necessary. I think China also. Maybe, it's very interesting to me. I'm waiting for the moment where China really steps up, because it still doesn't step up to the commensurate to its economic power in the world. It always lets Russia lead these things. So I'm sure that Russia and China work very closely together to send a unified message when it comes particularly to Iran, but also to Venezuela. And it may be this artificial Venezuelan crisis that the Trump administration has generated or ramped up. We might see China step out a little bit more than it usually does. Maybe this will be the event finally in 2019 where China will start punching up to its own level, because it doesn't do that. And we do know that Chinese diplomatic language is so particularly precise. They are very sensitive to that. I mean, unlike Western countries, unlike Donald Trump, we see that the Russians are very, very tame in their diplomatic language. It's just part of the DNA of Russian diplomacy. They're very, very careful. So, the Venezuelan government knows that Russia is, first of all, going to be a diplomatic platform for it. I think it's today that Pompeo and Lavrov will have an extended conversation. I think even meeting, and the Russians have made it very, very clear that they will defend the legitimate government of Venezuela. To what degree they will in the military sphere? Well, I got it wrong in the first time. I thought that they wouldn't be sending such high-profile advisors and military people, but they did, and that's sending a very strong message there. Again, it's a message to the Pentagon. From what I've been told, Lawrence Wilkerson, chief of staff to Colin Powell, he trained with the Venezuelan military, and he said they're competent enough, they're loyal enough, they do not like the gringos in the north. That was his language, and they would defend the country. And it's a pretty mountainous place. Does the Pentagon really want to get into that kind of conflict here? Because the U.S. would be very much in a weak position. You'll have a hostile population, a very small minority that might support an intervention, though major figures in the opposition aren't there yet. Guaido said he's considering, and that shows his desperation. It's the last thing the last card he can play is that. And I'm going to stick to my guns here. Again, bad metaphor. Trump doesn't want any new wars. He likes the show of force. He likes bluster. But before November 2020, I don't think he wants anything new. Does the Pentagon have a silver bullet where they can take out Caracas in 48 hours and install Guaido, and then the military will say, yes, sir? Do they have that plan? I hope they don't, because it never works, people. It never works. So I think, again, we're much more in the information war part of this than actually a military operation. Knock on wood.
Knock on wood, yeah. Alexander, Lavrov is meeting with Pompeo, I believe in Finland, correct?
Finland.
There you go.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And Lavrov... Go on. And Lavrov,
they're obviously going to talk about Venezuela. What do you think they're going to say to each other?
Lavrov is going to say what his boss, Vladimir Putin, said to Donald Trump in an hour-long conversation they had quite recently, which is hands off Venezuela. I mean, the Russians have made it absolutely clear that they are strongly opposed to the entire regime change project in Venezuela, that they support the legitimate government of Nicolas Maduro, who is the constitutionally elected president of the country. They do not support, they strongly oppose American meddling in Venezuela. And to the extent, of course, that they can assist Venezuela, which is a difficult thing for them to do, given the enormous geographical distance, they will support Venezuela. They've sent military personnel there. They're undoubtedly offering advice. I suspect they're providing intelligence advice to the extent that they can. They're probably offering diplomatic counsel. And of course, they're also undoubtedly mobilizing support in the United Nations and in the world, around the world, behind opposition to this regime change project. It's important to remember that the only countries which are supporting this regime change project, the US's regime change project, is the United States, its European allies, and its Latin American allies. Elsewhere around the world, there is profound opposition to this thing. Now, where Iran is concerned, I've no doubt that Lavrov and Pompeo will talk about Iran. But just to come back to a few points that Peter was making, yes, I think Iran does have Russia at its back, and I think the Russians are again doing probably as much as they can. Here, I think they could probably do quite a lot to help Iran. I think the problem, the relationship between Iran and Russia, is widely misunderstood. I don't think the problem is that the Russians don't want to embrace Iran, don't want to have strong and good relations with Iran. The problem is that Iran itself, a proudly independent country with a long history of difficult relations with Russia and a long history of losing wars against Russia, rather like Turkey has up to now been trying to keep a certain distance from Russia. They've ruled out having Russian troops on their territory. They've ruled out having Russian bases on their territory. There was a big storm in Iran when Russian aircraft were transiting an Iranian airbase to go and bomb targets in Syria, even though Russia and Iran are de facto allies in Syria. So the Iranians have always up to now been very careful of their relationship with the Russians. I think that as this situation changes with more American pressure on Iran, you will see that the Iranians themselves will gradually drop some of those doubts and suspicions, and that they and the Russians will gradually move closer. And Peter's absolutely right. Wherever the Russians are, the Chinese are always there in the background. They're there in Syria. They're there very overtly and openly in Venezuela, where, to be clear, they have invested much more than the Russians have done financially. And they're also, of course, present in Iran, of which they are a major customer of its oil, and of which, of course, as Iran is one of the main countries in Central Asia, it's an area of great Chinese interest. So we must not overlook the role of the Chinese, though, as Peter says, they like to play the game very softly.
Also, I just, the other side of the coin of what Alexander was just saying there, this relation, the embrace, the Russian Iran embrace. Remember, Russia also wants to, it has a unique position in the Middle East where it can talk to everyone, and it wants to keep it that way. Okay, because being the diplomatic conduit is going to be key as we go forward here. So they want to keep all avenues open, and they don't need to have a complete embrace of Iran, because it's not its geopolitical interest. It wants to be able to talk to other players in the region. If Donald Trump has his way, or I should say John Bolton has his way, getting out of any kind of crisis, the country that will be at the center of it all will be Russia, to de-escalate.
Agreed. I entirely agree with that.
Okay, Peter, we have a super chat from Sean. It's actually a question I was going to ask you either way. Thank you, Sean, for that super chat. Guys, send us your super chats as well. We will answer those super chats, and we're going to try to answer as many questions as we can in the live stream as well. Peter, there was a phone call between Trump and Putin. Your thoughts?
Trump was Trump. Great call. We had a great call. Okay. Good conversation. Talking about trade. Well, yeah, Mr. President, because there's almost no trade between the two countries, so you could start somewhere. And remember, all of those sanctions are in place. It goes back to Trump on the campaign trail. So he has never given up on the idea of better relations, but Russiagate just closed that possibility off. And being able to talk to Putin at such length and talk about it publicly was possible because of the Mueller report. In his mind, I don't think in the minds of Pompeo and John Bolton, I wonder if those two guys were sitting in the room and they're probably just bristling, like, what is he talking about? But it shows Trump's instinct. I don't think it's really going to go anywhere, but I do think, again, the last thing I said is that Russia being a conduit. I mean, the Trump administration, it looks like it's at the roulette wheel and or shooting craps, as it were. And I think it's important that the United States and Russia still have some kind of communication, because so many levels of communication have been broken over the last few years. And now it seems to be there's only one. It's just president to president. And we need to keep those channels open. It's really, really important to do that. Like I've always tried to explain to people for years, the United States and Russia don't have to be friends. They're very different countries. They have very different political cultures. The U.S. is a postmodern country. Russia is a very modern country. Okay, it doesn't embrace these post-Marxist ideas, political correctness, this Me Too stuff. It's completely alien to Russians, okay? Russians believe in sovereignty. They believe in borders. They believe in citizenship. But to finish my point is that the United States and Russia don't have to be, and should they never be, enemies. You don't have to be friends, just never be enemies.
Alexander Miss K says in the chat, Putin said to the Russiagate stuff, it began as a mountain and ended as a mouse or as mice.
Well,
I'm not sure the exact quote, but thank you, Miss K, for that. Alexander, what do you make of the Putin-Trump phone call?
Lots to say, actually. First of all, it was Donald Trump who initiated it. That is the one part of the conversation that everybody's agreed about. And it does seem to me that now that he's got Mueller out of the way, and feels vindicated by Mueller, which, to be clear, he has been. I think he's now thinking back to some of his original ideas and does want to see about improving relations with the Russians. I think it's multiple things. I think it's economics. I think he sees two compatible economies. I think he also somehow believes that if he can get the Russians on his side, that will increase his leverage over China and perhaps Iran also. But anyway, that's not
erroneously, well, indeed,
but
yeah.
Because this is the other point. If you actually look at the accounts that the Russians and the Americans have given of this conversation, it's almost completely different. I mean, it's as if two entirely different conversations took place. I mean, Donald Trump focuses on economics and to some extent on arms control. Putin and the Kremlin, the summary they've given, talks about Venezuela, he talks about Iran, he talks about all the subjects that we've been talking about. Now, that's not a sign that the Americans and the Russians are misrepresenting the call. Rather, it's a sign of what is at the top of each of the two leaders' minds.
Yeah.
Donald Trump wants to talk about economics and he wants to talk about arms control because that's where he thinks and hopes that he can make the big breakthroughs with Putin. Putin clearly doesn't believe that Donald Trump is up to making those kind of breakthroughs. He doesn't really believe that there's going to be a big improvement with trade with the US. I don't think he really believes that there's going to be any new arms control agreements with the US, especially with Bolton and Pompeo running the show. So his concern is to try to contain this deteriorating
Exactly. I was about to say
in relations. So that's why he talks about Iran and Venezuela. I have to say, not for the first time, it is Putin who's been more realistic. But it is, I suppose, a good sign, so far as it goes, that Donald Trump is prepared to talk to Putin and do so for a whole hour.
Yeah, and to buck the conventional wisdom in Washington, that anything to do with Putin and Russia as an anathema, he's going to say, no, I am president of the United States and I will do this. Okay, he's showing his willfulness here. And I think Alexander Mercouris is right. The phone call might stop the deterioration of the relationship that is in such bad shape right now. And I think also Trump in his gut is saying, you know, his administration is on the offensive, and if something goes wrong, you need a safety net, okay? And Russia is that safety net, okay? I mean, if something goes terribly wrong, there's a miscalculation, a bad judgment, which happens very often. You know, you still can make a telephone call and say, "Can we get out of this?" All right. So it's very wise. Like I said, you don't have to be friends, but you shouldn't be enemies. Okay?
All right, Peter, we have the 2020 campaigns are starting to gear up. We have Biden now in the race as well, and with Biden comes a can of worms called Ukraine and Hunter Biden and what was going on in Ukraine. A question from Andrew actually addresses this. Gentlemen, do you think Zelensky will be an ally on getting to the truth about the actions of the DNC in 2016 with Ukraine, as well as creepy Uncle Thief? I guess Uncle Thief, he probably means Uncle Joe there as well. Creepy Uncle Thief. That's the first time I've heard that being used. But Peter, Joe Biden is tied to a lot of corruption in Ukraine. You said that Trump speaking with Putin probably shows, both you and Alexander said that it probably shows that Trump is a little more comfortable now that Russiagate is behind him. Even though much of the mainstream media and the Democrats don't want to let it go, it appears that Trump might be signaling that he's ready to move on. But now there is Ukraine, and there is Joe Biden, and there's Hunter Biden, and there's a new president in Ukraine, Zelensky. What do you make of what's going to happen there?
Oh, what did Steve Bannon say? That what Trump is going to do? He's going to go full animal. Oh, he'll against his opponents. He will use Ukraine. He will use Ukraine. Plenty of people in the Trump orbit. The first word when I was about to say, the first word that popped in my mind was revenge. His orbit wants revenge for what has happened for the last 2 years, and Ukraine is the cudgel, and they're going to exploit it completely. Joe Biden is going to rue the day he stepped foot in Ukraine, and we got all the video, we've got all of the transcripts. I mean, this is. This is an autopsy of corruption that he can't refute, okay? Now, the point will the mainstream media pick up on it, other than Fox, other than Sean Hannity, maybe to some extent Laura, but Hannity he'll go hog wild with it. But will it make an impact? You know, we have to caution our viewers is that, you know, we're the three of us on a very regular basis talk about geopolitics, but that is not top of mind for most American voters. Okay, so let's not exaggerate this here. Zelensky, I don't even know if he makes it into the presidential mansion. Like he said, he isn't going to live there. He's going to live someplace else. The Ukrainian parliament is still under the control of the oligarchs that are the political situation before the election. He may be stripped of so many presidential powers that he's just going to be a figurehead. They want to put everything into the prime minister. They want to change the constitution. They've got the votes to do it. Zelensky might be just irrelevant, okay? A lot is happening politically in Ukraine right now, and it's basically going to overturn the democratic feelings of the populace that wanted change. Poroshenko and his clans and these oligarchs, they're feverishly trying to rewrite the laws of the land to make sure Zelensky can't do anything at all. So, I mean, and that's not reported at all in Western media at all. Maybe this is the first time you've heard it here. But they're circling the wagons against Zelensky. And if there's a modicum of success, Zelensky's not going to have any power to make any major decisions at all.
Alexander, what do you make of Zelensky, Trump, Biden, Ukraine, all that stuff?
Right. I need to make a general observation. Firstly, I don't think that Zelensky himself has any idea yet about what he's going to do if he actually does become president of Ukraine and is able to consolidate his authority in Ukraine to any degree. As Peter says correctly, he faces enormous obstacles against doing that. And even though a lot of people voted for him, and he won 3/4 of the vote in the runoff against Poroshenko, I suspect that vote that he got is very, very shallow. I don't think that most Ukrainians have much faith in him. Exactly, it's a protest vote.
Right.
Having said this, if Zelensky wants to break the oligarchs, let's assume that he does. I'm not saying he does actually want to break the oligarchs, but let's assume that he suddenly discovers that he wants to do that because he wants to be president of Ukraine, in fact, as well as in appearance. Then, of course, getting to grips with all this corruption, all these awful things that have been happening in Ukraine would be the way to do it. And interestingly, at this moment in time, he has a potential very powerful ally. And that ally is Donald Trump and William Barr and all those people, the Republicans in the United States, who also would like to know the truth about what was happening between the Democrats and the Ukrainians during the 2016 election and after. So, though I don't hold out a huge amount of hope here, there is a possible community of interest between Zelensky and the Trump administration.
Alexander, how can you tie in real quick before you go further? What relation does Zelensky say he does want to break the oligarchs in Ukraine? How is that connected to what's happened with Biden, Hunter Biden in Ukraine, and Trump's wanting to let's just say get revenge for what happened during the Russiagate hoax? How are those two things connected?
What could happen here is that Zelensky could use there's ample evidence, not just of Biden, but other American officials, private individuals and government officials that were involved in illegal behavior in Ukraine. He can take one of these examples because the Ukrainian elite in general wants to kiss the hand of Donald Trump because they know that they were implicated in helping Hillary Clinton. So they want to absolve themselves. They might give up somebody. Zelensky would benefit from it by having some kind of a war on the oligarchs, or maybe one little oligarch. Who knows? I mean, this would demand that he has a lot of political skill, and he had skill to get elected, but does he have political skill with a system that looks more and more stacked against him? And you have to remember the state apparatus they're parts of. They represent different oligarch clans, okay? They're not free agents. I mean, people get their job because they're associated with Kolomoisky or some other oligarch, okay? But for someone like Zelensky to break that logjam, that is a monumental desire to have. And we don't know. So if they're going to whittle away his presidential powers, then that's not going to happen. So this is a very vague possible scenario, which I don't think is going to play out. Okay, let's just see if the guy is going to rule as president before we really go much further with this.
Alexander, are there some chess moves that Zelensky can make?
Oh, absolutely. Because I mean, bear in mind, most of the people who seem to be implicated in the Ukrainian corruption are Democrats. I mean, Paul Manafort was not a Democrat, and he was implicated, and that's why he was targeted.
He took money from anybody and everybody.
but so it seems were the Podestas. So of course was Hunter Biden, and I mean we've now had a most extraordinary revelation, which I'd completely overlooked, which is that it turns out that Victoria Nuland was one of the people in the Obama administration, which was most heavily lobbying for Christopher Steele and his dossier to be taken seriously.
Wow!
So I mean,
get into that, Alexander, because we know Victoria Nuland. She said F the EU passing out cookies on my dock. Get into that.
Well, indeed. Well, we don't know the whole story, but I mean, I've just been reading articles. I mean, one of them was by Andrew McCarthy, who is at National Review, and he's a very reliable source.
And he's not very Russia friendly either.
He is not Russia friendly at all. I mean, absolutely in no sense is he Russia friendly. But it seems now Victoria Nuland was, along with Jeffrey Pyatt, the person who was there on the scene in Ukraine and who was manipulating the political situation, and who was caught on the telephone giving instructions about which ministers in the Ukrainian government should be filled by which people.
Yats is the guy.
Yats is the guy, exactly. So she was a central player. I mean, an absolutely central player and a very public player. People have mentioned the cookies that she was handing out on Maidan Square. A central player in the Maidan coup, and undoubtedly that coup was to a very great extent manipulated by certain Ukrainian oligarchs. Poroshenko was one, Kolomoisky was another, others were involved too. So all of these people were involved in this together in some form. All of these same people, like, as I said, Victoria Nuland, seem to have been major propagators of the Russiagate hoax. As I said, it's now emerged that she was, as I say, one of the people who was strongly pushing within the State Department for Christopher Steele and his dossier to be taken seriously. And so it seems to me that if you're Donald Trump looking for revenge, and if you're William Barr looking for the truth, and if you are the Republicans in Congress looking to win the 2020 election, here is an obvious line of investigation to take. All the Democrats, so many of the Democrats, seem to have been involved. And Ukraine was a Democrat project. It happened under the Democrats. You have got Hunter Biden, you've got Joe Biden, you've got the Podestas, you've got Victoria Nuland. You may have lots of other people.
Yeah, but you know, but the issue is, how will this help Zelensky? See, that's where I don't know how that fits in. Okay.
Well, Zelensky is the weakest point in this.
Yeah.
All I'm saying, I come back to what I said. If it's a huge if he decides, as I said, that he wants to be president in fact as well as in name, and the only way he can turn Ukraine round is by breaking the oligarchs and seeking a rapprochement with Russia. I want to stress, I'm not in any way saying that's what he wants to do, but if he does want to do those things, as I said, he now has a potential community of interest with the Republicans and with Donald Trump and with Bill Barr in Washington. Alternatively, if he doesn't want to do those things, well, he may find that he's coming under pressure from Donald Trump, Bill Barr, and the Republicans in Washington, and that may be a very difficult thing for him to withstand. So, you know, we shouldn't discount this possibility that there could be more investigations coming. I mean, under Poroshenko, very difficult to imagine that, simply because he was himself involved to such an extreme degree. With Zelensky, precisely because he was only, let's remember, a comedian before, he's not got things to hide in the same way. And maybe as a blank sheet of paper, he might be prepared to let these investigations take their course, or even conceivably try to capitalize on them. We'll just have to see.
Yeah, or he'll just end up being a puppet of the oligarchs.
Well, he could do that too.
And that's most likely the scenario.
Well, it could be. Yeah, I'm not saying Peter, but you know, even within amongst the oligarchs, I mean, there's perhaps no absolute identity of views. Some of them, like Rinat Akhmetov and Poroshenko himself, seem to be very deeply implicated in some of the events that took place with the Democrats. Others, who knows, maybe Kolomoisky are less implicated. We will see.
Yeah, I mean, what he needs to do, I don't think he's going to declare war on the oligarchs. He'll crush him like a bug. But what he may, again, if he's adroit, then he's smart. If he can rely upon certain elements of the state, like the Interior Ministry, the police forces, these things like this, he could come out as the great balancer of oligarchic interests, and that would elevate him, where he would be the arbiter. That would be given the level of corruption in Ukraine, that would actually be a pretty good outcome, okay? Because then he could exert some of his own personal policy preferences. But this is pure speculation on our part. It's really, really early days.
Very
really
early days. Yeah.
Yeah, but you know what, guys? We have some really, really smart people in the chat watching us because they make great connections. And here's the connection, Peter. I want you to comment on it. So you have Victoria Nuland pushing for the coup in Ukraine, married, as everyone is saying in the chat, rightly so, to Richard Kagan, who's a chief Robert Kagan, who's a chief neocon. I mean, this guy's high priest neocon. High priest neocon. And all of a sudden, Alexander is bringing up the fact that stories are coming out that Victoria Nuland was not only pushing for a coup in Ukraine, but she's working with the neocons and the Democrats and the DNC to push for a coup in the U.S. with the Steele dossier. So once again, neoliberals and neocons working together, coup Ukraine, coup U.S. against Trump.
And then they have their chorus called the media to amplify.
Right, and you have Maddow with both. Comment on this neoliberal, neocon connection that we see. It goes back, obviously, all the way from 2013, 2014, all the way from the Obama administration.
I think it goes back much further than that. I think it emerged during the Bill Clinton administration. I mean, around the time of the Yugoslav wars and a bit before. I mean, I remember Madeleine Albright, who was in a sense, if you like, a kind of precursor. I mean, she was the person who talked about the US being the exceptional country that could see further than other countries, and which was always a force for good, and which knew better than everybody else. And we saw then in the 1990s this extraordinary and very, very disastrous coalition emerging between, as I said, neocons on the left, neoliberals on the neoliberals on the left, neocons on the right. And it was around that time that they began to get themselves entrenched within the Democratic Party and within the US government, especially the State Department and the CIA, and in all the various think tanks. What has happened is that capture, which began in the 1990s under Bill Clinton, at some point, especially under Obama, it's extended to total capture of the entire media and the rest of the government as well. So now we don't really get any alternative debate about this. I mean, it always comes down to a question of who takes the hardest line. It is absolute heresy in the United States to stand up now and say, no, the United States is not an exceptional country. It is a country with many problems, many potentials, and great strengths, and great traditions and great achievements, but also many problems it needs to look at. It's a country amongst other countries, and it doesn't need to go around the world changing everything, reforming everybody, changing regimes everywhere. It needs to concentrate on its own problems, because those problems are mounting whilst this regime change agenda is being pursued instead. So this is the problem. This illness, if you like, has extended, and it has now infected the entire political class of the United States, and is causing enormous trouble and danger to the American political system and to the American people.
Yeah, Alexander Makiris is absolutely right to go back to the Clinton years, because this is really the advent of the unipolar moment. And this is what's brought them all together. They all see this unipolar moment as an opportunity. They may look at it from different parts of the spectrum, but it's still the unipolar moment. And because of this commingling of these different, seemingly different groups, they do look at preserving the unipolar moment as a joint interest that they all have. You know, that is what we've seen, that the neocons have been able to capture the Democratic Party. And that was when Hillary was running. So that closed the circle there completely. Okay, so you have this evolution, but it's all about how to interpret the meaning of the unipolar moment and how to preserve it. That explains this hyper foreign policy of Donald Trump. Bolton sees Pompeo, he has kind of a messianic view of things. It's very weird sometimes. Here's a guy that's against abortion, but is willing to commit genocide around the world. Interesting. But it's this unipolar moment. That's what brings them all together. That's what cements everything together. And they want to preserve that unipolar moment. That's why John Bolton thinks it's his calling not only to preserve it, but to make sure there are no competitors. This goes back to Paul Wolfowitz, the Wolfowitz doctrine here. And this is why they've all come together. And of course, I always have to mention, and the media loves it, okay? They get fat salaries. They get to do this, what I call is a fake patriotism, because a lot of things that they're parroting of power is very detrimental to the middle class of the United States. Okay, and we know that because in a moment of hubris, the electorate came out, and I'm still convinced that was the anti-war veterans, men and women in uniform. They tipped the election in a number of congressional districts because they're anti-war. Donald Trump got that one right. Yeah. He got it right. And what he's been doing by surrounding himself with these neocons is a betrayal to his campaign promises and the spirit of those promises.
Yeah, once again, it all goes back to Yugoslavia and the NATO bombing of Serbia.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
That's the genesis of it all.
That was the first crossing of the line.
That's what that's how they've used the same playbook, just different variations of it ever since. And the last time, no, not the last time, but one of the most recent usages and applications of the playbook was trying to get rid of Trump. They brought regime change that has been tried and tested, failed every single time, but they brought it home. They brought it home to use against their political opponents. That's the evolution of it. It's come home to roost.
Yeah, and Madeleine Albright was really the template for Secretary of State, for the warmonger Secretary of State, huh? Absolutely. I mean, she's been the model ever since.
Yeah, she Albright. Remember how she mocked Colin Powell? You know, you have this nice shiny military, you got to use it, and he said no. Having a nice shiny military is the deterrent itself, not its application. Then, of course, Colin Powell destroyed his career by going in front of the United Nations and saying that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, and that destroyed him.
Yes.
Okay.
Excellent point. All right, guys, let's do some super chats. We've got a lot of super chats in the queue, so let's get to them. We're about an hour in. Everybody who's joining us, thank you for joining us. Send us your questions, send us your super chats. Hit that subscribe button if you're not subscribed to the channel. Smash that like button. Share the channel with everybody you know. Go to the Duran shop, buy a shirt, and donate to us on PayPal and Patreon. All the links are in the description box. And you can also follow us on Instagram _com. Even though I don't like to say that as much after Facebook did the purge that they did, Instagram being owned by Facebook. But we'll get to that probably in the second half of the live stream. Let's do some super chats for now. Alexander from Not Today. What if the DC crazy psycho warmongers choose war against China to avoid paying their debt to the Chinese, as they are having big trouble seizing Venezuela?
Well, that would be a superpower war between two great superpowers. The Russians would certainly become involved at some point. I think we're talking about World War III scenario. I mean, no doubt there will be all kinds of attempts to de-escalate and to bring it under some kind of control. And we hope and pray that if it ever does get to that, voices of sanity will prevail. I don't believe we're going to get into that scenario. I think that the Pentagon and the people in the Combined Chiefs of Staff in Washington, looking at this sort of situation, if they were given an order to attack China, would say this is absolutely stark raving mad. If we're given that kind of order, we are going to go public and we're going to complain about it. So I don't think we are close to that scenario. If it ever happens, as I said, we are in very big trouble.
Well, what I think the scenario is and it's the South China Sea, is that we could get into a skirmish. I mean, basically, both sides want to send a message here, but obviously both sides don't want it to escalate. So it's going to be kind of a game of chicken that neither side wants to go full blown. I mean, Alexander Maciris is right. I mean, then they talk about World War III, and then, I mean, it's the end. Okay. But there is jockeying for position, and that's what it's all going to be about over the next few years. As far as tying trade to it, well, neither side wants to destroy itself. I mean, that's why Trump is beginning to realize this getting a good trading deal with China is going to be far harder than he had hoped for. Okay. And his recent tweets about threatening more tariffs isn't helping the situation at all. I mean, as far as I know, as of early this morning, a delegation of 100 from China were supposed to arrive in Washington. I don't know if they're still going to come or not, but I mean, it's being put on hold here. Both sides want a win on this one, and that's why it's going to be very, very hard, okay? And interpreting a win is going to be very difficult as well. We have to make sure that both sides don't lose. We always have to think about it, turn everything on its head. We want to avoid lose, okay? Each side will interpret what a win means, okay? They'll spin it whatever they want to, what it means to me. Just like the telephone conversation with Trump and Putin. I mean, two totally different interpretations because of what Alexander Maciris said, and he's absolutely right. What's top of mind, what's most important to each side.
Yeah, Alexander, from 10% to 25% is what Trump said in his tweet that Peter was mentioning. And Trump also said that the reason the U.S. economy is doing so well is because of the tariffs on China. What do you make of that?
Well, I don't think it's the reason.
We don't know that yet. We don't know that yet.
I think the major reason the U.S. economy boosted to the extent that it did is because of the various tax cuts that Donald Trump carried out when he first became president, which has provided a very big fiscal stimulus to the U.S. economy. And I think what we've seen over the last couple of months is that when there was an attempt by the Federal Reserve Board to compensate for that fiscal stimulus by a monetary tightening, the Trump administration and the business community protested, and that went into reverse. So now we're actually seeing something of a monetary loosening again. Now, those two things together tend to make economies grow faster, and that is what we're seeing. So I think that to expect or talk about these tariffs as being making the big difference that Donald Trump says they will, I think it's not only premature, I suspect it's probably actually wrong. That's my own personal view.
And plus, importers and exporters on both sides, when the deadlines were coming into play about when the tariffs would go up, there was a spike in trade. People are getting their business transactions done before. So that accounted for a real injection of stimulus of trade. And now we have to look at what's happened to the economy since those tariffs have come into play. That's what I'm more interested in. We don't have the data yet. We just simply don't have the data yet.
No. I think it's important to remember about the US, which is that it is basically a self-sufficient a continental economy. I think that people perhaps overestimate the problems that its trade deficit is creating. The real problems with the US is not, I think, the fact that it runs a deficit with China. Its problems are that it is now running and is continuing to run a structural budget deficit, and that an awful lot of the US economy is now floating on credit. Credit is running out of control in the US and has been doing so for a very long time. So at the moment, the US is, I think, running a budget deficit of over 4% of GDP, which is very high at this stage of an economic cycle. Apparently that deficit is going to grow. Total debt is already, I think, rapidly approaching the sort of $22 trillion level and will overtake nominal GDP. And that also is going to grow. Those are the underlying problems of the United States.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Peter, we have a super chat from Rainy Steps. Are Christian churches being desecrated in Russia?
Not that I'm aware.
It's the reverse, isn't it? I mean, they're building like a church.
They're rebuilding. I mean, some of these churches, it's so beautiful what they've been doing over the last few years, building new churches. So, yeah, I mean, it's the vandalization of particularly churches in France is just really quite shocking to people here. It's just something unthinkable. I mean, it's a completely different mindset. I mean, you both have been to Moscow. Alexander, Christopher, you lived here for a spell. I mean, overall there's a respect of public places. There's very little graffiti, and the metro, the underground metro system, it's you could eat off the floor almost quite literally. It's so clean, always very clean. So these profane acts against holy places and whatnot it's a rare occurrence. I mean, obviously there's sometimes desecration of cemeteries, but sometimes it's just pure vandalism, just for to be stupid. But that's why, we remember of House of Cards, and I was very disappointed that Pussy Riot was given such a high profile. When they desecrated the Christ the Savior Church here in Moscow, it was a really huge scandal, and people were really, really offended by it. And having Western countries and governments, support these profane people, it was so insulting to the average Russian. Their churches desecrated one of the most important churches in Russia, and the U.S. State Department and NGOs called them freedom fighters and freedom of expression, freedom of speech. It's just for Russians, it's the world turned upside down. And as the great Russian ambassador to the United Nations, Churkin, asked Samantha Power, when is Pussy Riot going to do the Catholic Cathedral tour in your country? It's a really good point. How would American Catholics feel if those women desecrated the altar of St. Paul's, something like that? So,
indeed.
No, I don't hear about those things. I mean, there are always vandals that commit vandalism for vandalism's sake. Okay, but attacking churches, no, that's not something that happens here.
In fact, Peter's absolutely right. The Pussy Riot episode actually encapsulates the difference. I mean, Russians, and I met Russians who are atheists and who are not part of the church, almost without exception, were horrified by what Pussy Riot did. They saw it as an act of desecration. In the West, it was celebrated as an act of dissent and political freedom. As I said, that was not how it was seen in Russia at all, even by many people who would be, as I said, of atheistic views. The reaction of the Russians and of the West to the same affair was completely different. And desecration of churches, and indeed, as Peter says, of public spaces in Russia is it just doesn't happen, not to any significant degree. The Russians, on the contrary, are extremely careful, both of their churches and of their monuments.
Yeah, what a despicable stunt that was. And that's all it was a stunt. That was a stunt. And the mainstream media, they jumped on it.
I lost friendships over that. I lost friendships over. I'm steadfast in my beliefs there. Okay, I do not believe desecrating someone's house of worship is right under any circumstances.
No. Well, it was a criminal offence. And can I just say something, which is, of course, the European Court of Human Rights, which has now become very, very strongly anti-Russian in its judgment, because for many years now, the Russians have been prevented from participating in the selection of judges to the European Court of Human Rights. And so, as I said, the balance of the court has shifted in a very strongly anti-Russian direction. But even when it looked at the Pussy Riot case, could not fail but say that it was a criminal act. So even the European Court of Human Rights took that view. They said that the sentence was disproportionate, and they had some criticisms of the way the trial was conducted. By the way, about the second, I disagree. But even they had to accept that it was a criminal act. And that's how it should be discussed and reported and treated. And of course, in the West, it never is.
All right, while we're on the subject of human rights, Alexander, we have a super chat from Chaucy. Alexander, are British judges owned by the NWO government? Can Assange expect any justice in the UK?
Well, I recently went to a rally on behalf of Julian Assange, and I spoke there, and you can actually find my comments on the Duran on our website. And several speakers actually said, and I think there's some truth to this, that many judges in Britain still actually observe the law and carry it out, and that of all the institutions that the British state has, the judicial system is the one that has preserved its standards best at a time when all the others have sunk and fallen. I am not going to write off, I'm not going to despair of Julian Assange's prospects in this case. In my opinion, he has a very strong case indeed. I think the argument, the case that the US has brought against him for extradition is weak and riddled with factual and legal problems. Having said that, one has to also face the fact that there is great hostility to Julian Assange in Britain. Some of that is finding its way to the judiciary. And if I was to say that I believed that there was no political interference or no political role in this case originating from the British government, I wouldn't be telling the truth. So I think the prospects are hard, the case is bleak, even though paradoxically the case is strong, but nonetheless, I still retain some hopes.
I think, Alexander McCarris, I think our moderator is gone. It's just you and me now.
It's just you and me. Oh, well, there we go. I mean, on Julian Assange, I mean, can I just say a few things? I mean, briefly, I think any case against him under the Espionage Act is going to face many problems if he is ever sent to the United States on it, because I think the First Amendment of the Constitution gives him pretty clear protection on that one. And I think the argument that he's not a journalist is a hopeless one. What the Trump administration, the Trump Department of Justice, actually Jeff Sessions' Department of Justice, has come after him on is this conspiracy with Chelsea Manning to break a password to gain access to a computer, of which, by the way, Chelsea Manning already had access. I mean, it was intended to conceal his identity, Bradley Manning as it was then. It wasn't intended to gain access to that computer. So this is not a case of hacking. And I think that the facts, the factual case, is a very weak one, and it is brought several years out of time. It's probably time, in fact, it's definitely time barred. So I would have thought that if this case was conducted properly, the British courts should refuse extradition. As I said, there are, and I know there are, some decent judges who take their role very seriously. But no one who has followed the story of Julian Assange's interactions with the British judiciary can be at all complacent about the outcome.
Did you guys lose me for a bit? I think I was booted off. Yeah, I was booted off of Hangouts.
Alex, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear. I think everyone's saying the word "pussy riot." The gods at YouTube
there we are,
got angry.
Peter. Well, we do have technical problems. Hangouts, Google Hangouts, which is what we have.
We carried on. We carried on.
So you guys hear me all right?
Yeah.
But there we go. I have to say,
Alexander, do you hear me?
Another general comment. I have to say, I think the impetus for this Assange prosecution has probably not come from Bill Barr or from Trump himself. I think it originated very much with the Jeff Sessions Department of Justice. And it looks to me as if
Pompeo,
and Pompeo and all those awful people, yes. Pompeo's head of the CIA. And it always seems to me as if Jeff Sessions was far more interested in nailing Julian Assange than he was in doing a proper job as Attorney General and supervising the Russiagate investigation, or ensuring that the Russiagate, the Mueller investigation, was properly supervised, which of course it wasn't.
Do you guys hear me?
Yes.
So I think
I believe Alexander doesn't hear me.
Donald Trump was very obviously clearly.
Alexander McCurris. Alexander, can you hear me?
I can hear you clearly, Peter. Can you hear me?
I can, but I don't think you can hear Alexander Christophora.
No, yeah, I can't. Can you hear Christophoro?
Yeah,
I can hear him.
Okay, yeah, I got kicked off.
Shall I log off and try and
log off and come back on? Way. I can hear Peter.
Okay.
Either way,
Peter,
you two
continue.
I've got a super chat question for you. Either way, Peter. Okay. Yeah, just kicked me off for some reason. All right. Anyway, guys, let's get moving. I have a question for you, Peter, from David Bauer. I don't know if you heard it when I was reading it to you and then I got booted off. But it says the start of the Tour de France is in 2 months from now. What kind of visual impact will the yellow vests be allowed to make, and any other impact? The yellow vests are still going strong.
I hadn't thought about that.
It's a big event, the Tour de France.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it is. It's an international event. It's the premier event for that sport. I hadn't thought about that at all. That is really interesting. And we'll see what kind of solidarity, or we'll see that the cycling organism, whatever governs cycling there. I wonder, and make them wear white coats or white vests. But that's a really astute question. I hadn't thought about that. Give me a few days to think about it. Let me contact my friends in France, and maybe I get a good answer for you. Excellent question.
There's an excellent question. Alexander is back with us. Alexander, can you hear us?
Perfectly clearly. Very well.
Great. Good to have you back. All right, let's get moving. Peter just answered a question on the yellow vests and the Tour de France. I don't know if you have any comments on that, Alexander.
No,
the question was that the Tour de France is coming in a couple of months, and the Tour de France and the yellow vests are still going strong. So you think there's going to be any disruption there?
I would be surprised. I mean, the Tour de France is such a huge institution in France and such a popular one. I would have thought that the people who make up the yellow vests are the supporters of the Tour de France, rather than its people who would want to disrupt it.
Yeah, so the interesting is but it will be politicized. I think that's the question here, and I think it'll be kind of interesting. I mean, will we see the athletes in solidarity with the yellow vest? Interesting.
Well, you know what the lead cyclist wears?
The yellow vest.
Yellow
vest, yeah.
So that was a good question. Good question, really, David. Really good. And let's see. David sent us another super chat. Props to the Duran Sports Department. All right. Cool. And we have a super chat from SM, a $12 super chat. Does Alexander notice a pattern that Trump is focused primarily on the bad actors, deep state oligarchs within the Ukraine government et al.? Is there a pattern, Alexander, that Trump is focused on the Ukraine bad actor oligarchs?
I don't think Donald Trump knows very much about Ukraine. I'm sure he doesn't understand the internal politics of Ukraine at all.
Maybe he'll ask Joe Biden first.
Well, indeed, absolutely. I mean, I don't think Donald Trump is very interested in Ukraine, as it happens. I mean, what he is interested in is the campaign to delegitimize and remove him from the presidency. I think he is extremely angry about that. And if he gets the sense that the Ukrainians were behind it, he will go after them very hard to the extent that he can. That's what I think about Donald Trump and Ukraine.
But I think what could be very interesting is he could kill a number of birds with one stone. Just release all of these documents, okay? Theresa May, if you're still around, you're going to go down like a
stone.
Very hard, because her government is very hip deep in all of this here. That's the reason why Trump didn't release these documents before Mueller finished his report. But I think he has such animosity towards Theresa May and the intelligence services of the UK that he's gonna make them feel pain. He's gonna roll it out. He's gonna roll it out. Okay, he's gonna run on this. He was wrongfully accused, and he doesn't. We all know he doesn't even take a slight negative tweet. Well, what do you think? What do you think he thinks about British government? He's going to come back and wallop them hard.
Peter,
wait.
stay with that because we have a super chat from Jonathan, which is, could Ukraine gate force Republicans to drop the Russophobia to an extent?
It's Russophobia now is so baked in. This is going to be a generational problem to deal with. It's not an administration thing, okay? It's built in. I mean, Russophobia, we've talked about it before. It's deeper in the UK, but it's more pervasive now in the United States. And so, you know, as we lamented so much after it came out, and it was a few people like Max Blumenthal and Jimmy Dore that caught onto the same things that all three of us caught on when we came across the Mueller report, is that it assumed was involved with stealing these emails, giving them to WikiLeaks. It assumes that. It doesn't even question it, okay? So I think the Russophobia is going to stay there. This whole thing with Ukraine is going to really confuse the Russiagate conspiracy, but this Russiagate conspiracy, even though Mueller has closed his office, they don't even have a phone number now. They're gone. They went home, okay? On. And so when it's just like when Barr was in front of the Senate committee, I mean, he kept saying, you know, why do you keep talking about this 14-day hiatus and these 4-page letter? You have the whole report. What are you talking about? You're not making any sense. And so if Ukraine somehow puts a counter argument and counter evidence, they're not going to absorb it. They're just going to. This is what this kind of mass hysteria does. You just can't accept facts that are against your worldview. Okay, your pathological view of politics. It's all about Trump. You know, the Trump resides in their brains 24/7.
All right, and do we have a question for Mishkin? Is that Mishkin with you, Alexander?
Yes, this is Mishkin. This is my dog Mishkin. His sister Solveig is sleeping on the sofa just next door.
He's huge.
Oh, yes, he's huge. Yes, he's huge. He's a very sweet dog, very sweet-natured, very loving. But he's the one who barks. Solveig doesn't bark.
All right. Well, let's get a question to you, Ed Mishkin. Alexander, staying on Ukraine for Miss K. What about the UK's military engagement in Ukraine?
Well, I think that is an example of the follies of the British, actually, because if the United States gets involved militarily in Ukraine, that is extremely bad, because the United States is a military superpower, and it brings the United States closer to an armed confrontation with Russia, which would be an absolute and complete disaster. It also encourages the hardliners in Ukraine to do crazy things in East Ukraine, where, frankly, we should be trying to restrain them, not encourage them. What the British do in Ukraine, it makes absolutely no difference to the overall military and strategic picture. But what it does do is confirm to the Russians what a hostile country to Russia Britain is. So it's a good example, again, of Britain pretending that it's some kind of a great power, letting its Russophobia, its extreme Russophobia of its political class, influence its actions, pick a quarrel with Russia, which it cannot win, in an area of conflict far away from Britain, of no conceivable interest to the British people, and ultimately exposing yet again what an underlyingly silly country our government is making us look and become. So I'm afraid, I'm sorry that there are British troops in Ukraine. I'm sorry that they have a role there. I'm not worried about it. Well, I'm worried about those troops, but I'm not worried about it in general geostrategic terms. It's about the United States that I worry about.
It seems to me that the UK just wants to show itself that it's relevant still.
Yeah.
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 And really, and I think it's really just bluster. I mean, I know that the defense ministry is always complaining that it doesn't have enough money because cooler heads say that we don't need to spend money on this. We have other priorities. But you know, you have the Ministry of Defense showing that it's necessary, and so it looks for trouble in the world to churn up to prove that it is necessary. It is a really just. It's very short-sighted and actually just very immature. I mean, it's all about, you know, the vision of yourself on the global stage. Okay, Britain is not playing a major role. Okay, it's not in its geopolitical interest to be doing this. Okay, but then logic doesn't usually win out with.
Well, certainly not in Britain. And Peter, everything you say is absolutely right. We're trying to pretend to ourselves that we are a great power. We could be an important power if we conducted our diplomacy properly. Which would mean, of course, having we don't necessarily have to have friendly relations with the Russians, but we could at least talk with them and negotiate with them and have meaningful discussions with them. And their economy is very complementary to our economy, and we could do quite a lot with the Russians if we did it that way. Sending troops to Ukraine impresses no one. It reminds me of a story about Bismarck when, you know, he was said, what happens if the British send an expeditionary force to Pomerania? He said, I'll send the police to arrest them. I mean, it's almost on that level. I mean, it's just the thought that, you know, sending a couple of hundred British troops to Ukraine is going to intimidate or scare the Russians, who are a great military power. It's childish.
Yeah, the interesting thing too is that, again, you know, I don't think the British political establishment they don't have a sense of awareness when these British troops are in Ukraine. Believe it or not, there are television reporters in the Ukraine that film it all. And it all is shown on Russian television screens in the evening news. And it shows that Britain is a hostile country to Russia. Okay, they're there to prop up some of the most nefarious political elements in Ukraine. I'm talking about like Right Sector and people like that, Azov Battalion, and we know who they are. And the British just soil their image by having any kind of remote contact with these people. They soil their reputation. Okay, and Alexander Mercouris is right. It doesn't have to be this way. It's a choice made. It's a choice made by the British political elites. It's not the choice that Russia makes.
All right, we got some more super chats. They're coming in. Keep them coming in. Keep those super chats coming. From E. Ray Reichley, $10 super chat. Love you guys. I watch everything you put out. Good job, gentlemen. Thank you for that super chat, E. Ray. And from S. Zariel, let's see. I'll throw this out to everybody. Alexander, Peter, gentlemen, have any of you read or listened to Christopher J. Jerknis? I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Jerknis' books or interviews where he places Putin and Trump into the same box of a greater Zionist plan. Some compelling evidence there. Have any of you guys read those books?
No, I haven't read those books, and I don't believe that there's any great Zionist plan that both Putin and Trump are part of. Certainly in Putin's case, he is the president of Russia. He pursues Russian national interests. Russian national interests involve, at the moment, Russia having good relations with Israel, which is not a country which is hostile to Russia. But certainly, he is not pursuing Israeli interests in any way at all. And I think any idea that he is should be completely banished.
Also, we've said many times on these podcasts, for better or worse, you like it or not, Israel is a political reality. And Russia looks at the Middle East and faces realities. Yes. You can't, you don't wish it away like Pompeo and Bolton. They want to wish away the Islamic Republic of Iran. They want to wish away Maduro. But that is just fanciful, and it's really impractical.
Yes.
Russia has diplomatic relations with Israel, but it does with Saudi Arabia, with Syria, with Jordan, with Lebanon. I could go on. And that's that is a rational, forward-looking foreign policy. That's how you solve problems. Don't ignore them or pretend they're not there. Okay, the Russian government has been very critical of Israel and its settlement policies. It has said this repeatedly. It votes that way at the United Nations and on the Security Council. So I applaud Russia's diplomatic efforts in the Middle East. The United States would only help just a little bit. It might be a better place to live.
So the other side of the coin, guys, what about Trump's policy towards the Middle East, or the Trump administration, so to speak?
But that's all about domestic politics.
I agree.
Okay, that's his domestic politics. It's his donor class. Okay, he's in Trump's mind, and I'm not agreeing with him. I actually strongly disagree with the President of the United States. In Trump's mind, he says, what is the cost of moving the American embassy to Jerusalem? What's the cost? What is the cost of the United States giving away something it doesn't even have a right to give away? The Golan Heights. See, in Trump's mind, he said these are freebies. And he doesn't understand that they have serious geopolitical implications for the region. But in Trump's mind, he says, Netanyahu wants this? Really? Okay, fine. I mean, we don't even have the Golan Heights. If he wants it, fine. Why do we care? That's his approach to it. It's very transactional. And then he goes to Las Vegas. He has his donors there, and they pat him on the back. And he says, that's a win. That's how he looks at it. He looks at these things as low cost. And I think he's making a big mistake by doing that. Okay, and we'll have to wait for the deal of the century with Jared Kushner's plan with to resolve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. What I hear, it's a dismal plan, because just like I just said earlier, the Trump administration is going to just say, well, the Palestinians, well, they're not refugees, and well, we're not going to even think about them, and so they just write them off of history. And in that way, we can solve the problem. That is ridiculous. That is absolutely ridiculous. Okay, so the Russia deals with the Middle East as it is, and the United States deals with the Middle East as it wants it to be.
But also with a domestic spin, as Peter said, Alexander.
Absolutely, there's
huge.
No question
it's a huge
about
domestic
this.
spin.
Donald Trump has to win. Wants to win the 2020 election. It's going to be a tight race. He didn't win the popular vote last time. I think he definitely wants to win it this time. He wants every vote that he can. He wants to consolidate his evangelical Christian base, which is strongly pro-Israel. He wants all the votes of all the Jewish people in Florida and New York that he can get. And he wants to keep people like Sheldon Adelson and his donors happy. And as Peter absolutely rightly says, compared to that, any problems that giving the Golan Heights to Israel might cause in the region are for Donald Trump inconsequential, because he doesn't really care about those, and he doesn't really understand them to any great extent anyway. So from Donald Trump's point of view, it is a no-brainer.
All right. Thank you for that super chat, Zariel. And we have a super chat from Carolyn. Peter, does the Duran believe the United States southern border has collapsed? We rarely cover, I don't think we have covered the southern border, to be honest. Well, but it is a big story while we're talking domestic issues.
Well,
it is a cornerstone of domestic policy.
These podcasts are presented to you by three individuals. Okay, so we have different opinions on things. People tend to ask us questions that we tend to agree on, but there's a lot of things, a lot of nuance there. I am actually for building a wall. I strongly believe that. Okay, for security reasons, for infrastructure reasons within the United States, for all of the social costs, and I'm in principle against people that want to rearrange and change the demographics of the United States for political advantage. Okay, that's what it's all about. Okay, so I believe in sovereignty. I believe in borders, and so I support building a wall on the southern border. Absolutely.
Yes, I think I should make it clear, Peter, that so do I on all of this. I too support the building of a wall. I too think a country has to have control of its borders. I have never known of a situation in history where anybody, or at least in modern history, where
I was going to say
anybody,
the Roman Empire, they didn't have their walls.
well, they had their walls. I mean, the Chinese had their walls. The British have the seas around them. I mean, a country that doesn't control its own borders is a country that is putting its entire existence as a state in question, it seems to me. And frankly, I mean, I don't know how bad the situation on the southern border is, because I don't follow this story with the attention that an American.
100,000 people a month now.
Well, there you go. I mean,
100,000
of people a month. That's 1 million people a year. I mean, it seems very, very bad indeed. And of course, it is putting huge pressure on economic and social conditions of the United States. It is affecting the demographic balance of the United States. And a country that just allows this to go on and on and on, and without anything being done about it, is putting itself in great jeopardy, it seems to me. And so is the political class that supports it.
Before Donald Trump, Democrats were for controlling the border. I mean, there's so many clips on YouTube of Schumer and Pelosi saying things. I mean, like all going all the way back to the Clinton years, Bill. This is just a political issue. This is a cudgel against Trump. It's so irrational. It's so irrational. When they 2.5 years ago, they wouldn't have used the same kind of salty language that Trump uses, but in principle, the idea, they supported it, okay? And I spent many years of my life in California. There was a guy named Cesar Chavez, and he represented what were they called? The fruit pickers, they worked in agriculture, these were his people that largely had come from south of the border. Some of them were second or third generation Mexican. And he was the biggest advocate of controlling the border because his fruit pickers, agricultural workers, their wages were being driven down because people were crossing the border and it dropped wages on it. He wanted to protect his own union, okay? And at the end of the day, if you look at the strongest supporters against Trump's policy of building a wall, go to their mansions. They have walls. They have surveillance. They have guard dogs. And I suppose I'd like to ask a question of everyone watching this podcast right now. When you go to sleep at night, do you lock your door? If you do, why? I think it's simple.
All right. Let's go to another super chat. We still have a lot of super chats to get to from Gender Neutral. Nice handle.
That's a good beginning.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. Thank you for your $2 super chat. And the question is, and it's spelled Peter, it's spelled Jender, and it's neutral, Newtrall.
Clever.
Very clever. All right. Have you listened to Dr. Steve Turley's podcasts? I have. Have you guys checked out Dr. Steve Turley?
No, I haven't.
A smattering of stuff of it. I don't have any strong opinion. Okay.
Yeah, he's good. He has good podcasts. Yeah. And another super chat from Gender Neutral. Alexander, is G. Williamson really the true UK leak? Was he framed?
I have no idea.
Question. Good question. I want to know too.
I don't know. The key point to say about this. And we did a video on this, a program on this, Alex and I. There has been no proper investigation done. Theresa May did exactly what she did during the Skripal episode. She came along and said that there is no plausible alternative explanation other than that Williamson was the leaker. Just as she said that there is no plausible alternative explanation that the Russians tried to poison Sergei Skripal. And Williamson, who enthusiastically backed what Theresa May was saying at the time of the Skripal affair, now that he's caught in the same way, being branded as a guilty man without a proper investigation, is of course complaining fiercely. I don't know. I mean, I think there should be a proper investigation. I would add actually, that leaks in Britain amongst cabinet ministers are not by any means uncommon. I'm not quite sure why Williamson has had to be singled out in this way. I think it's probably more to do with Theresa May trying to look strong at the same time as local elections were happening, which showed that she is actually utterly discredited across the country, than with any real compromise of cabinet secrets or of national security. On the second, I just don't believe it at all.
Can he make a political comeback?
Oh, well, I'm sure he'll be around, but I don't think anybody takes him very seriously. I mean, he was a terrible, awful defense minister, and he's widely received around the country as an idiot, which he is basically.
Yeah, just he was seen, in my eyes, he was a jerk, and he was fluent in it. Yeah.
He was a clown living in clown world, so he fit right in. Peter from John Huber, Super Chat. 2 of the 5 eyes started the Trump coup. Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
One of those is Australia and the UK. Australia and the UK were key parts of the Trump coup.
Yep. It's looking like, if you look at the case of George Papadopoulos, it's unraveling, you guys. I mean, I can barely keep up with it. The number of people that were involved in entrapping him is extraordinary. I mean, and this, we have to assume that it wasn't just this one, I mean, Papadopoulos, I'm sorry, seems like a nice guy, but I mean, he was really, almost like a coffee, get me coffee. So, okay. I mean, he was really very low. I mean, what other people were targeted in the campaign? And it looks like this was a really big operation. And it's really quite terrifying, because it looks like this was not just a one-off, but it looks like it was a concerted plan to really go after people in Trump's orbit. Okay. And plus, we need to find out. We've all said this from day one. We need to know the truth about the Steele dossier. I think that'll solve almost all of the problems there. And who touched it? We already talked about Victoria Nuland shopping and around. A lot of other people were doing it as well. And I have to believe, and I guess this is maybe a leap of faith here, but I mean, you'd think with all of the experience in government and opposition research, didn't just one of them say, don't you think this thing is nuts? Really? Victoria Nuland? She was Undersecretary of State for European Affairs. That's one of the highest positions in the State Department. That is a plum job. Everybody wants it if you're in that line of business. And she read it and believed it? Really? You have to, then it really questions the competence of these people. I mean, we're going to learn a lot about this. This Papadopoulos thing is back with a vengeance, and there's a lot of threads to grab onto. Not like the dossier, which is patently stupid on its face, but George Papadopoulos met people. I'm sure he's got ticket stubs, and he's got hotel reservations, and diaries and transcripts. I mean, he met a lot of people. George Papadopoulos, really a low-lying figure in the Trump orbit. And he'd only been there for a short amount of time. This is extraordinary. Yeah,
and it all went down, Alexander, in the UK, or a lot of it went down in the UK. Obviously, Christopher Steele being in MI6, but Papadopoulos was in the UK when you had, the mischievous behavior of Mifsud and Stefan Halper. And Alexander, your thoughts, just, when Peter said that, this thing goes very deep and probably goes very high up, maybe all the way up to Obama, definitely to Hillary Clinton, and that people are going mad. Guys, we had Hillary Clinton on Maddow begging the Chinese. This is how stupid these people have become. Begging the Chinese to get Trump's tax returns and his financial records.
Well,
people really becoming consumed by absolute stupidity, or maybe they were stupid all along. I don't know.
Well, that's a good question. That's a good question.
Hillary Clinton, I will tell you this: she's not she's not stupid. Crazy, maybe, but stupid, definitely not. I mean, she was a very, very able lawyer. back in the
Yeah,
in
well,
the 70s.
do you know about her cases? Yeah,
well, I do.
lawyer, getting a rapist off and stuff like that.
Well, but she was a good lawyer, Peter, and she was involved in Watergate. And I mean, I don't think there's any question about that.
She got fired. She got fired on the
well,
Watergate
maybe so.
Commission.
But having said that, she is not stupid, but crazy maybe, and manipulative to an extraordinary degree. Now, Peter's absolutely right when he talks about Papadopoulos, because Papadopoulos, the Papadopoulos and Christopher Steele issues are the root of this thing, and the root of the mystery is in London. It is in London that the big events happen. Yep. It was in London where Christopher Steele was working and compiling his dossier. By the way, I know where I've often passed the office where Orbis, his company, is based. And of course, it was in London where Papadopoulos met Mifsud, where he was introduced to Mifsud, where all these bizarre conversations happened, where he met the Australian diplomat Downer in the bar, and where all these stories were fabricated. Now, the big question.
Rarely mention Australia, Alexander. It's incredible. They rarely mention Australia's hand in it.
Well, indeed, and Australia played a big role. Of course, Australia is a Commonwealth country, and very close to Britain.
These two guys are meeting George Papadopoulos in a pub.
Well,
really? I mean, these are pretty established people talking to somebody that no one had ever heard of, except for them.
Peter, it's clearly a case of entrapment. Now, the question is, who was the wire puller behind it? It might have been the British. Philip Giraldi thinks that, in fact, it was Brennan at the CIA who was talking to people in British intelligence and Australian intelligence, and was telling them to set up all of these things and get all of these things done. We need an investigation to find out. We must. This is in the public interest. I mean, more in the public interest than almost anything I can imagine, that we find out the truth about what was going on in London and who was pulling the strings and how. Was it Brennan? Did Brennan, if it was Brennan, did he consult with Hillary Clinton? Did he consult with Barack Obama? What did he tell Obama? We need the answers to all these things, and we also need the answers to what the British knew and what they were told and what they were saying, because there are lots of unanswered questions here.
Yeah, I used the word imagine. I'm imagining what John Brennan will look like in an orange jumpsuit. Just a thought.
Yes, that is a good thought, though. Let's see. We have another super chat from Chauncey. Will the EU elections be allowed to happen in the UK? And is Farage our Brexit savior, or just there to divide the Leave vote? Good question.
There is such an atmosphere.
Take it away. Yeah, take it away.
There is such an atmosphere of panic, especially within the Conservative Party at the moment, about those Euro elections. Theresa May's latest great scheme is to do a rapid deal with Jeremy Corbyn to try to patch her deal together by tacking on a customs union onto it, push it through the House of Commons, and stop these Euro elections happening, which everybody expects now would result in a Farage landslide. There are people in the Labour Party who are panicking. The people in the Conservative Party are panicking a lot. I think the latest opinion polls put the Conservative Party, the dominant party in Britain, at just 13%.
Oh, yeah.
It won 43% in the general election. So I can see every incentive to trying to get these elections cancelled. I personally doubt they will be, because I think that there will be enough people in both the Labour and the Conservative parties who will say, if we do a deal of the kind that Theresa May wants us to do between Corbyn and Theresa May, for her deal to be passed with a customs union attached, we will obviously avoid the Euro elections. But the prospects then is of Nigel Farage and his Brexit party morphing into a massive threat in every Conservative seat and in every Labour seat in the North and Midlands of England. So I think that there will be enough sense left within the political class to pull back from this. And I predict we will have the Euro elections, and I predict that Farage will sweep the board, and then we will see. But it's a complicated situation, complicated because of the incompetence of the British political class, the inability of the Conservative Party to get rid of a leader who is destroying it, and the fanatical arrogance of the Remainers, who are prepared to sacrifice the entire political system of Britain in order to keep the country in the EU indefinitely. So we have a very, very bad situation here.
Everyone's going to lose.
Everyone's going to lose. Everyone is losing.
Farage is going to win.
Well, Farage is going to win.
He's going to come out on top.
But it always makes you wonder what would have happened if he, I think he made such a terrible mistake of just leaving after the referendum. I mean, that's kind of the counterfactual history that I would actually ponder with a beer. What would have happened if he'd stayed and helped shepherd the process? Because Theresa May is, I guess, the most incompetent prime minister in the history of the country.
She's the most incompetent and the most duplicitous. And you're absolutely right to ask that question, Peter, because I think if Nigel Farage had still been there throughout this process, leading UKIP, winning by-elections, local authority by-elections, and perhaps even parliamentary by-elections, continuing to put the pressure on the Conservatives, I think that might have made the difference and stopped this awful situation with Theresa May doing this terrible deal with Brussels, with the EU in its tracks. Unfortunately, as I understand it, the man felt utterly exhausted. He'd climbed the political equivalent of Mount Everest to get his referendum, to get the referendum held at all, and then to get the referendum won. And he made the greatest mistake of his political life in saying to himself, well, now Brexit is inevitable and I can withdraw from the scene and I can do what my family wants me to do, which is to return to normal life. But it was a terrible mistake. It left his task half undone. And the result is that it gave an opportunity to people on the Remainer side to undo it entirely. It just goes to show, as you correctly say, what might have happened if he'd been there all along. The fact that he's making this colossal impact now.
Okay, from S. Azariel, a super chat. Gentlemen, I would like to recommend that you take a look at literature by Jack Nice. God, I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Oh, well.
It has historical facts and researches to prove his points. Remain open to other approaches and information. Well, send us a link of his books and we will absolutely take a look. Peter from Lori, super chat. How about employers pay U.S. workers a good wage instead of relying on dirt cheap labor from Mexico? In truth, we have a ton of border control already. Thank you, Lori, for that super chat.
Well, I mean, I agree. Okay, I mean, it's the Chamber of Commerce in the United States. They like cheap labor. Okay, obviously. Okay, and this is at the expense of the people that are already there. You know, it's really quite remarkable. A lot of people don't seem to understand this, but if you ask recent immigrants or people that immigrated years ago, their second or third generation, a lot of them are against open borders too. A lot of them will say, look, I did it legally. I did it the right way. I'm a legal, proud American citizen now. And why you that for cheap political reasons, for short-sighted reasons, the whole hard work that I had to go through with my family, you're saying that it was done in vain because you're going to give everything away anyway. You know, a lot of immigrants feel that way. A lot of people don't understand that because this is such a myopic debate because it's all about defeating Donald Trump's primary campaign plank. That's all this is about. It's not about compassion. You know, look what happened when Trump threatened to start dumping illegals, and I'm going to use the term illegal because that is a legal term in the United States, okay? I'm not going to just use their words. This is what authoritarians do. I'm going to use the words of the law, and the law calls them illegals, all right? And so dump them into these sanctuary cities. You want it? You deal with the problem. And of course, the sanctuary city people like, oh, no, I don't want that. Yeah, it shows your duplicity, that shows your hypocrisy, it shows your stupidity, and it shows your bias.
All right. Another super chat from Lori. Brian Becker's podcast, Loud and Clear, has an interview with Papadopoulos. It's really a crazy story. He was definitely entrapped. Yeah, it looks like
check out Morning Futures with Maria. It's on YouTube right now. I watched it about 2 hours ago. A very extensive segment with George Papadopoulos. Like I said, answering the original question, I mean, more stuff is coming out. I mean, during the time that we have been talking right now, live, more stuff is coming out. It's amazing what's happening.
I don't have any doubt that he was entrapped. As I said, the only question is, by whom? That's the only question.
How far up does it go?
How far up does it go?
We'll find out.
We'll find out. Alexander, very quickly from Gobawala, any comments on Gaza and rockets being fired back and forth? There is a truce. There's a ceasefire at the moment.
There is a truce.
Will it hold?
Well, it won't hold because the place is under siege and has been under siege now for decades. And we don't talk enough about Gaza because what is going on in Gaza is just beyond awful. I mean, it is people being held in this city in what is essentially now become almost a giant concentration camp / ghetto masquerading as a town. And conditions of life there are almost unendurable for many of these people. And it ought to be in any properly functioning media and political system, if we had that in the West, it ought to be a massive scandal. And there ought to be huge pressure on the Israeli government to try and find a solution to this, which understood the political aspirations of the people there and which provided for some kind of humanitarian outcome. But there is no pressure because the story isn't being reported and it's all being reduced to an issue of terrorism, which it is not.
Alexander McCurris is right. There's this no question who is right and who is wrong, what is right and what is wrong in this situation. It's so black and white. But you wouldn't know that, you don't know that, because there is a blanket propaganda cover for Israel and its treatment of the people of the Gaza Strip. It's just complete, okay? It is horrific what is going on right now. The media always portrays it as parody, as some kind of equality, which it is absolutely not. Israel controls the Gaza Strip's airspace, its borders, and its Mediterranean border. Israel patrols that. This is a open air concentration camp, and because primarily of the United States, because primarily American media, the mainstream, will not tell you the truth about what's going on. They will not tell you the truth. They parrot lies. And the remarkable thing is there's more real debate in Israel itself about these issues than you will ever find in American media, because everyone keeps their mouth shut, keeps their head down. They don't want to lose their job. They want to be called anti-Semitic, which is ridiculous. I mean, this is what they've been using that issue in Britain. It's just shameless, okay? And then they do the same thing in the United States. It's shameless, okay? These people that parrot this are cowards. They're just simply cowards. It's as simple as that.
Okay, let's do a couple more super chats, guys, and we'll wrap it up. And we have a good one here from Jonathan Gillespie. Jonathan Gillespie. Okay, what ideology most describes Mr. Vladimir Putin? Guys, what ideology describes Putin?
I think he's an old-fashioned conservative.
Exactly. You took the words
he
right
has,
out of my mouth.
yes.
Exactly. Exactly.
I mean, he has. I mean, he's not a believer in complete free market economics. Old-fashioned conservatives didn't used to be. I mean, the if you go back in time to the world of you know, late 19th, early 20th century America, that was never an an American conservative position. He believes in. He's patriotic. He supports the flag.
The
He's
family,
socially conservative.
the family.
He supports the family. As I said, I think conservatives sums him up very well. Peter.
And just to add one more layer there, I mean, he's a Orthodox believer, and he's a big supporter of the church and the church's mission in Russian society. So he's an old-fashioned conservative. Didn't start out that way, but that's how it ended. He was much more liberal in the beginning, much more liberal in the beginning.
More. I would agree. He is also no sort of fanatic about anything. On anything. And that, by the way, is also an old-fashioned conservative position.
All right, great super chat. Thank you for that super chat, Jonathan. And Alexander from Bob, where is it, Bob? Would the concept of Brexit be somewhat moot if populists take control of the EU Parliament?
No, it wouldn't be moot because
Doesn't
you
change
mustn't.
anything.
Because you got to say you mustn't overestimate the influence of the European Parliament. I think if the European Parliament, if populists, as you call them, anti-EU people, anti-EU parties, gain control of the EU Parliament, the European Council and the European Commission will marginalize the Parliament, and to the extent that they can, and it will become essentially a talking shop. So don't overestimate what the European Parliament can do. It will make a difference. It will not make a decisive one.
2 words: democracy deficit.
Yeah.
Period.
All right, Peter. Let's see a super chat from SM. Trump is the most vetted POTUS in U.S. history. He was investigated and/or spied upon by the DNC for 4+ years, the RNC 2 years, Mueller 2 years. Trump is a patriot, period. Expect the left to get crazier. Sadly, Trump 2020. Is Trump the most vetted president in U.S. history? And the fact that he was investigated so much, and they really, in essence, came up with nothing.
I don't know what there is to know about Donald Trump that we don't already know. Okay, having said that, I think it's fair to say the real estate business around the world has its foibles, okay? Things happen, all right? I'm not an expert in real estate, okay? Real estate law, real estate transactions, and that's why they're going after his taxes. Look, you've had the collective power, I was about to say wisdom, but not much wisdom, that looked through Donald Trump's life. I mean, you had the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, and all the other alphabets agencies look into this guy, and they came up with zilch. So I have to say the guy has to be pretty much clean. Okay, the thing is that Donald Trump had probably a whole brigade of lawyers. Unfortunately, Cohen seemed to come to the surface there, but I'm pretty sure he paid his lawyers pretty well to make sure that he wasn't in any kind of jeopardy. So yeah, I think he's essentially very much vetted. Yeah.
Alexander, the most vetted.
I would agree with that. I don't think there's any president that I can think of who has been investigated so much. And I think it's important to add, by the way, that one person who has definitely sifted through Donald Trump's tax returns is Robert Mueller. I mean, Robert Mueller has access to pretty much everything. He would have gone through the tax returns. The IRS obviously has gone through the tax returns. And it's extraordinary that after all this massive 3 years investigation, a man who, as Peter correctly says, his business was in the absolute rough and tumble of the real estate industry, one of the toughest and grittiest in the world, has basically come out clean. The only thing I can think of that Donald Trump did, which could be held against him, is that he might have paid off 2 women he had sex with, which I have to say, I mean, you know,
that's never happened before.
That's never happened before. Just say, I mean, that's the only thing that they seem to come up with. Well, exactly, impeach him. That's right. But I mean, you know, corruption, tax evasion, all those things we were hearing about, you know, bribery, being close to Russian oligarchs, all of these things, none of that came out in the end.
Yeah.
Look, I cannot give Donald Trump a clean bill of health and all of these things because I simply don't know. But but it's incumbent upon his opponents to prove that. Okay,
yes.
And that's fine. I'm perfectly willing to listen. Okay,
yes.
But you know, their track record for the last 2 years. I mean, it is one of the biggest. It is the biggest political humiliation of my lifetime.
Yes.
I mean, this is absolutely humiliating. It's Donald Trump is a crass, very worldly guy, and he has a style for it. And I think it was Victor Davis Hanson that pointed out, which I really thought was a very interesting point, is that, you know, when AOC, when she went down to a southern state for some kind of convention, she started talking like this, like Southerners, you know, and then Hillary Clinton does the same thing, okay? But then when she's in New York, she talks like a New Yorker, and when AOC is in Brooklyn, she talks Brooklyn, okay? Donald Trump, wherever he goes, he wears that blue suit and a red tie, and he always says who he is. He never changes his accent. He's love him or hate him, he's authentic. That's why people like him, because he's authentic. And again, I'm sorry I have to say this, there's many areas, particularly in foreign policy, that I'm dead set against Donald Trump, okay? But I do believe he's an authentic guy. And people that have known him for 20, 30 years say, yeah, that's exactly the way he is in life. What you see is what you get. I don't think, what about Cory Booker? I mean, that guy has fraud written all over his face, okay? And I actually figured out how to say his name, Buddha Judge, okay? I think that's how I say it. This guy's a con artist. He's a super con artist. Okay, and he's really smooth. Okay, Kamala Harris, she's the pure opportunist. It's written all over their faces. Okay, Elizabeth Warren. Okay, you know, Pocahontas. You know, I guess you have to keep the lie going because he said it so many years ago. Okay, I mean, all these people have huge problems. Okay, and none of them are authentic. That is the biggest issue in this election, my opinion, outside of the bread and butter economy. But that's a huge issue that the left cannot deal with because the left is a fraud. Leftist media is a fraud. Okay, it's virtue signaling. It's all it is.
Yeah, they're paying.
I could go on for a long time about this.
And we'll wrap it up with this, Peter, because I really want to get to this story very quickly before we wrap it up. And the media is paying the price for its ratings. CNN's ratings are absolutely plummeting, but CNN has been successful in getting a lot of people deplatformed, starting with InfoWars' Alex Jones, Paul Joseph Watson, Laura Loomer, Farrakhan Khan was also deplatformed. You know, I think that's obviously just for show. What do you guys make of Facebook's war on many people that they're labeling extremists, but I'm sorry, they're not extremists at all. I mean, guys like Paul Joseph Watson.
Well,
actively preach against violence. Well, he has controversial views, but they are non-violent people.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, as I said, none of these people have committed any crimes. None of these people have have done anything that justifies deplatforming them. The fact that they are popular is not a reason to
and Alexander and Peter, can you please address the constant argument, you guys, of, well, they're a private company, they can do whatever they want.
Well, if they are a private company, which if they want to fulfill that role, then they should not be operating as a monopoly, which effectively is what they are. They should be broken up and subjected to antitrust law in the same way as any other company that has the kind of dominant position that Facebook has. Carry on, Peter.
And they're playing the role of editor. That makes them a publication. They're a publisher.
Absolutely.
So those laws have to apply to them as well.
Exactly.
They've got this get out of jail free card. Okay,
Yes.
that has to change. Okay, but one thing, let me just say that I think what I find most disheartening. I mean, okay, Mark Zuckerberg, he's in the pocket of power. Okay, he's in the lap of luxury. You know, really. Okay, I mean, this is not a serious person. Okay. But what is serious, the serious issue that I worry most about, is that who's leading the charge for censorship? Journalists are doing that. Remember when they made the announcement about these deplatforming? I watched CNN and MSNBC, and these journalists were cheering it on, cheering it on. My God, these people are like passengers on the Titanic, ordering the ordering of the seating. Okay, who's going to be first, who can sit and who cannot sit, when the whole damn thing is going to sink. Okay, that's what you're seeing right now. Journalists promoting censorship. That's where we stand.
Exactly. Can I just add another thing about Facebook being a private company? Of course, what they're actually doing, they're doing because they've been put up to do it by the Democrats, by the deep state. I'm not sorry to use that.
And their ideology. This is what brings them all together. This
Well,
ideological corruption. Okay, that's what brings them all together. Because they actually believe they're doing the right thing. I actually do believe it. Okay.
Oh, I'm sure they do, yeah. But the fact of the matter is, this is privatized censorship.
Yeah.
In order to try to get around the First Amendment of the Constitution.
Excellent.
I mean, that's all it is. I mean, point. You know, and we shouldn't let this trick fool us as to what is really going on. And as Peter absolutely rightly says, journalists who play along with this thing are literally destroying their own profession. They are undermining those basic freedoms which a free press needs if it is to function. And it'll catch up with them. It's bound to. It'll also catch up with Facebook, which is rapidly losing, I think, credibility. And its share price is falling, and more people are leaving it.
It's been, and
you know, go ahead, Peter.
They're destroying their business model.
Yeah. Bruce McKenna says private company of defense, ? Standard Oil was a private company. Yeah, I mean, Standard Oil is an excellent example, and it was subjected to an antitrust action. And so should Facebook be, if that's what it says it is. And, you know, a lot of people forget the history of Facebook and Google. A lot of people forget that Facebook and Google were funded by the CIA, by the government in their beginnings. They took money from venture capital. I know the venture capital market very well. The venture capital market in the United States gets its money from who? From pension funds, from the US government, a lot of the money that they invest in these companies. So to sit there and say that, you know, these companies are private is a joke. They get a lot of support from taxpayer dollars.
You didn't build that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they get a lot of, especially in their early days, they get a lot of money and a lot of support from the government and government institutions and endowments and all kinds of things. So the whole private company thing is ridiculous. One more super chat just came in. Alexander, can you quickly clarify the Magnitsky affair regarding Putin?
Oh my gosh. Quickly clarify the Magnitsky affair.
You can't do it quickly.
You can't do it quickly. I saw a wonderful film about this by Andrei Nekrasov, who's a Russian director. I'm now in contact with him, by the way. We've become friends, which is interesting. And I will simply say this: it is a searing indictment on that entire theory. Putin had nothing to do with anything involving the Magnitsky or Bill Browder or anything like that, nor did the Russian authorities. This is a sordid action of corruption and a sordid court case. And what certain people in the West have done is, as they always do, they meddle in a court case and in a criminal investigation in Russia in order to try to embarrass the Russian government. And they always and invariably side with a Western businessman in any quarrel. This case, Mr. Browder, the owner of the companies that Magnitsky used to work for, in order to embarrass the Russians. But can I just say something? Don't believe anything you read in the mainstream media about the Magnitsky affair. It has no connection at all to the truth. It's something that cannot be summed up quickly. It needs a proper article or a proper study to do it. But do go and see if you can find it. You can track it down on the internet. Andrei Nekrasov's film. It explains exactly what happened and who was involved.
Okay, thank you for that super chat reality check. Thank you for that. Guys, let's wrap it up. We covered a lot of ground. We had some technical glitches as well, but it all turned out good in the end. Thank you for everyone who joined us on this live stream. I'm not sure how many people were on the stream, but the chat was moving fast.
At one time, 1,661.
That's great. That's great, guys. Thank you very much. Remember to subscribe, hit that like, share the channel with everybody. Go to the Duran shop. I believe I'm running a coupon now, 10% off, 10 or 20% off if you put the code Assange. I'll put that in the description as well. So 10 or 20% off if you use the Assange code during checkout. Peter, what are you looking at this week in the news?
I'm going to do a special program tomorrow commemorating the end of the Second World War in Europe. It's something I do every single year. And I have 3 really great guests, so everybody can see it on Wednesday on RT. It'll be on YouTube on RT, on YouTube on Wednesday as well.
Wednesday on YouTube. All right, guys, keep an eye out for that. Alexander, what are you looking at this week in the news?
Well, I mean, there is a political crisis. I'm sorry to say it's flaring up in Britain again. So since I live here, I'll have to keep a close eye on it. But I think the big story at the moment is actually in the United States, because I think that Mueller has reported the Democrats have gone bananas, but they weren't able to lay a finger on Barr in the testimony that he did. Which we've discussed in previous programs. And I think we will start to see over the next couple of days and weeks the counterattack and the renewed investigations starting to take shape. And as I said, we've seen the name of Victoria Nuland coming up today. We've seen more information about how Papadopoulos was implicated. We've heard lots about Ukraine. I think that we are going to see exciting and interesting things happen in the United States over the rest of the spring and summer.
Yes, our turn. Okay, our turn.
Absolutely.
All right, Barr's going to go on the attack.
No.
All right, let's see it. What a story.
Well,
what a story, the Russiagate thing.
Well,
the
closest that the United States has come to a coup in my lifetime, and I think in its history. I don't think there's ever been a situation before quite like this one.
Yeah. All right, guys, let's wrap it up there. Peter Lavelle, host of RT's Crosstalk in Moscow. Thank you, Peter, very much. Alexander Mercurs, the Oracle of London in London. Alexander, thank you very much. All right, guys, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your super chats. Thank you for all your questions. We really appreciate it. We appreciate everything you do, the support, the likes, the sharing of the channel, the donations. Without you guys, we wouldn't be here. So thank you very, very much. Have a great Monday. Have a great week ahead, and tune in. We've got a lot of videos coming out this week, a lot of news. Have a great morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. Take care, everybody.